Sophia Orsini burst into flames during the closing prayer last night. I'm writing this while her ashes are still warm in my hands. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. Father Matteo Carbone, youth pastor at Sacred Heart Parish, claiming teenagers spontaneously combust during prayer. But I'm holding what's left of a 17-year-old girl who was laughing at my terrible joke about Moses 20 minutes before she died. So forgive me if I don't care how crazy this sounds. The thing is, God help me, Sophia wasn't the first. Let me back up. My name is Father Matteo Carbone, and I've been the youth pastor at Sacred Heart for 3 years now. 3 years of pizza parties and confirmation classes and trying to convince teenagers that Jesus is cooler than TikTok. You know what? Some days I actually believed it myself. Sophia certainly did. That kid had more faith in her pinky finger than I have in my entire body most days, which is saying something considering I went to seminary and everything. Cardinal Silvano Roncalli, my supervisor, the guy who decides whether I get transferred to some parish in Alaska or get to keep my job here, he always says youth ministry is about shepherding young souls toward Christ. Easy for him to say. He hasn't spent 3 years watching kids deal with divorced parents and depression and social media anxiety while trying to figure out if God actually gives a damn about their problems. Sometimes I think Cardinal Roncalli forgot what it's like to be human, you know? All that red silk and Vatican protocol can do that to a person. But the kids, man, the kids keep me going. Or they did. Before they started burning. It started 3 months ago. Maybe 4? Time gets weird when you're running on 3 hours of sleep and too much coffee, which has been my life since seminary. Insomnia's been my constant companion since I was ordained. Probably the stress of trying to be worthy of the collar, or maybe it's the $47,000 in student loans from Pontifical North American College that keep me up at night. My grandmother Rosa always said I worry too much. Matteo, she'd say in that thick accent she never lost, God provides for his priests. Yeah, well, God's got a funny way of providing through Sally Mae loan payments. Anyway, it was a Tuesday evening. We were having adoration in the main sanctuary, one of those quiet prayer times where the kids actually shut up for 5 minutes and pretend to be holy. Marco Borghese was serving that night. Good kid, 16. Family's been at Sacred Heart since before I was born. His nonno built half the pews with his own hands back in the 70s. Marco took his altar server duties seriously, maybe too seriously. Kid knew the Latin responses better than some of the older priests. I was in the back, half praying, half watching to make sure nobody was texting under their prayer books, when I heard this sound. Like sizzling bacon, but wrong somehow. And there was the smell, not sulfur, not yet, that came later, but something sweet and burning, like when you accidentally touch the hot iron to synthetic fabric. Marco was kneeling in front of the tabernacle, perfectly still. Too still. I thought maybe he'd fallen asleep. Wouldn't be the first time a kid dozed off during adoration. But then Elena Cursini, she was sitting 2 pews behind him. She started screaming. Marco was on fire. Not like someone had poured gasoline on him and lit a match. He was burning from the inside out, like his soul had become a furnace and his body was just kindling. The flames weren't orange. They were this pale blue color, almost white, and they made no sound except that horrible sizzling. He never screamed, never moved, just knelt there burning until there was nothing left but ash and his grandmother's rosary beads, somehow unmelted on the marble floor. The kids were losing it. Elena wouldn't stop screaming, little Dante Colana threw up in the holy water font, and I just stood there like an idiot holding my phone, trying to figure out if you call 911 for spontaneous combustion or if there's some special Vatican number for impossible bullshit. By the time the fire department arrived, there was nothing to investigate. Just a pile of ash in the shape of a kneeling teenager and 17 traumatized kids who couldn't explain what they'd seen. The fire chief, this guy Murphy who's been doing the job for 20 years, he took one look at the scene and declared it an electrical fire. Faulty wiring in the sanctuary lighting, he said. Tragic accident. Electrical fire. In a stone church built in 1923 with wiring that was updated in 1987. With a pile of human ash in the exact shape of a praying boy and no burn marks anywhere else in the building. I tried to argue. I really did. But Murphy kept talking about insurance claims and liability, and Cardinal Roncalli showed up looking like someone had told him the Pope was thinking of making guitars mandatory at Massachusetts. He pulled me aside while the paramedics were bagging up what was left of Marco. "Father Carbone," he said, "and you know when the Cardinal uses your last name you're in trouble. This is a terrible tragedy. Electrical fires are unfortunately common in older buildings. The diocese will be reviewing all our electrical systems immediately. Your Eminence, with respect, that wasn't an electrical fire. Marco just, Father." His voice got that edge it gets when he's about to transfer someone to a parish in rural Montana. "A young man died tonight due to faulty wiring. The fire department has filed their report. The matter is closed." But it wasn't closed. Not for me. Not for the kids who saw it happen. Sister Francesca Medici, she runs the youth ministry coordination, practical woman, used to be a public school teacher before she took vows. She tried to help. The next day, she was all about grief counseling and trauma response. "These kids need professional help, Father Carbone. What they think they saw." She kept saying, "think they saw," like 17 teenagers had simultaneously hallucinated the same impossible thing. I wanted to push back, But I've got $47,000 in seminary debt and a grandmother who lights a candle for me every Sunday and tells her entire neighborhood that her grandson is a priest. Plus, Cardinal Roncalli had already started talking about how the diocese needed to evaluate the effectiveness of our youth programs, and maybe I needed additional training in crisis management. So I kept my mouth shut for about a week. Then Elena Corsini came to me for confession. "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned," she said, but her voice was shaking. Elena's tough, captain of the debate team, president of student council, the kind of kid who argues with college professors for fun. But in that confessional, she sounded about 8 years old. "What's troubling you, Elena?" "I keep dreaming about Marco, but in the dreams, he's still burning, and he's trying to tell me something. And Father, I wake up and my sheets are warm, not sweaty warm, like heat warm. And yesterday during chemistry class, my lab partner said I felt like I had a fever, but the thermometer said 98.6. My blood went cold." "Elena, have you told your parents about the dreams? They think it's trauma. Mom scheduled me an appointment with a therapist. But Father, what if it's not trauma? What if whatever happened to Marco is contagious?" I should have told her to see the therapist. Should have given her some scripture about God's peace and sent her home with a rosary. Instead, I heard myself saying, "Have you noticed anything else? Any other changes?" "The smell," she whispered. "Sometimes I smell that burning smell from the church, but I'm nowhere near Sacred Heart. And Father, sometimes when I'm really upset, when I'm crying or angry, I can feel this heat building up inside me, like my blood is too warm." That night I couldn't sleep. Not unusual, insomnia's been my friend since ordination, but this was different. I kept thinking about Elena's fever dreams and Marco's impossible death and Cardinal Roncalli's too quick explanations. Around 3 a.m., I gave up pretending to sleep and went to the church. Sacred Heart at night is a different place. During the day, it's all bustling parish life and crying babies and old ladies arguing about flower arrangements. But at night, with just the sanctuary lamp glowing and the shadows long and dark, you remember that churches are thin places. Places where the boundary between this world and whatever comes next gets a little blurry. I knelt where Marco had died. The marble was still stained. Not burned, just discolored, like water damage but darker. I tried to pray, tried to ask God what the hell was happening to my kids. But all I could think about was seminary, about studying the martyrs and their impossible deaths. St. Lawrence grilled alive but cracking jokes. St. Joan burning but claiming she heard angels. The church loves its burning saints. We just don't usually make them in youth group. That's when I found the envelope. It was tucked under the tabernacle, wedged in that little gap where the marble base meets the floor. No name on it, just thick cream paper that felt expensive. Inside was a single sheet with 7 numbered lines. typed on what looked like an actual typewriter. Never leave teenagers alone in the sanctuary after 9 p.m. No youth activities during the third week of any month. If a teenager's body temperature exceeds 102 degrees Fahrenheit, evacuate immediately. The youth room door must remain unlocked at all times. Never discuss the incidents with parents without cardinal approval. All youth group prayers must be in English, never Latin. If you smell sulfur during youth mass, dismiss everyone immediately. At the bottom, in handwriting that looked like it belonged in a medieval manuscript, Father Carbone, your predecessor, learned these through experience. Learn from his mistakes. A friend, my predecessor, Father Bruno Castellano, had been youth pastor here for 15 years before me. I'd always wondered why he'd requested a transfer to diocesan archives. Weird move for someone who was so good with kids. Guy had a real gift for youth ministry, could get teenagers excited about theology like it was the latest Netflix series. But when I'd asked him about the career change during my first week, he just muttered something about preferring books to people and practically ran away from the conversation. I tried calling him that night, got voicemail, tried again the next morning. Same thing. Finally reached him on the third try, and the moment I said Marco Borghese, the line went dead. So I had 7 rules with no explanation, and a predecessor who wouldn't return my calls, and a dead teenager who'd burned from the inside out during prayer. Oh, and a cardinal who was pretending the whole thing was an electrical fire while somehow knowing enough about incidents, plural, to include them on a list of rules I wasn't supposed to have. You want to know the worst part? Some of the rules made perfect sense in hindsight. Rule 1. Marco had stayed late that Tuesday evening, alone in the sanctuary, lighting candles for his sick grandmother. Rule 6. The kid had been whispering the Agnus Dei in Latin when the flames started. I remember now. His voice had been so soft, so reverent, which meant someone knew this could happen. Someone had documented the patterns, the triggers, the exact circumstances that turned teenage devotion into funeral pyres. And instead of preventing it, instead of shutting down youth ministry or exorcising the building or doing any of the things you'd expect the church to do when faced with supernatural horror, they just took notes. I should have quit right then. Should have walked into Cardinal Roncalli's office and demanded answers or a transfer. Should have called the Vatican, the FBI, the goddamn Ghostbusters, I don't know. Instead, I folded up the rules and put them in my breviary, right next to my bookmark for daily prayer. Because here's the thing about being a priest, especially a priest with seminary debt and a grandmother who brags about you to her entire neighborhood. You don't just quit. You adapt. You find a way to keep shepherding the flock, even when the flock is literally catching fire. 3 weeks later, Elena Corsini's temperature hit 103 during confirmation class. I remembered Rule 3. I dismissed everyone immediately, told them we were done early because of the heat wave. Elena looked confused but grateful. She'd been complaining about feeling dizzy all afternoon. I walked her to her car personally, made sure her mom was picking her up, and then went back to the youth room and threw up in the wastebasket. Because I knew, looking at Elena's flushed face and glassy eyes, watching her wipe sweat off her forehead while complaining about feeling hot from the inside, I knew exactly what was happening to her, and I knew that somewhere in the diocesan archives, there was probably a file full of rules just like mine. Rules written in the blood and ash of teenagers who loved God too much for their own good. I've been following the rules for 2 months now. 2 months of checking temperatures and dismissing youth group early and making sure nobody prays in Latin. 2 months of watching my kids like a hawk, looking for the signs, the fever, the dreams, the smell of burning that follows them around like incense. Elena's fever broke 2 days later. Temperature came down to normal, the dreams stopped, and she went back to arguing with her AP history teacher about the Protestant Reformation. Following Rule 3 had worked. Whatever was building up inside her, getting her out of the church environment had stopped it before it could finish. But I couldn't stop thinking about that phrase in the rules. Learn from his mistakes, plural, mistakes, which meant Father Castellano hadn't just observed the burning. He'd caused some of it through trial and error. But last night, Sophia Orsini broke Rule 7. She didn't mean to. We were closing with our usual prayer circle, Our Father in English, like always, When little Dante Kalana, he's got some kind of attention thing, started fidgeting. Made a joke about the altar candles looking like birthday candles. Wished he could blow them out and make a wish. Sophia laughed and said, "I wish we could pray like they do in the old movies. All mysterious and Latin, just like that." Just a throwaway comment from a 17-year-old who loved God and loved her church and had no idea that some wishes are too dangerous to speak out loud. The smell hit me immediately. Sulfur, sharp and bitter, cutting through the usual incense and old wood smell of Sacred Heart. I should have dismissed everyone right then. Should have followed Rule 7 and gotten every kid out of that building as fast as possible. But Sophia was glowing, not burning, not yet, just glowing, like she had warm light under her skin. And she was smiling, this peaceful, transcendent smile that made her look like one of those Renaissance paintings of martyred saints. Beautiful and terrible and completely unaware that she was about to die. "Sophia," I said, trying to keep my voice calm, "why don't we call it a night? It's getting late." "Oh, Father Carbone, can't we stay just a little longer? I feel so close to God right now. Like I could just reach out and touch him." The other kids were staring. Elena had gone pale, probably remembering Marco. Dante was backing toward the door. And Sophia just kept glowing brighter, kept smiling that saint's smile, completely oblivious to the fact that her body temperature was probably climbing past 102, past 103, past anything a human being could survive. "Sophia, honey, we need to go. Now." "But Father, don't you feel it? Don't you feel how close he is? I just want to pray a little more. Maybe in Latin like the old days, like when the church was more, I don't know, more holy somehow." And before I could stop her, before I could tackle her or cover her mouth or do anything except watch in horror, Sophia Orsini clasped her hands together, closed her eyes and whispered, "Ave Maria, gratia plena." She made it through 3 words of the Hail Mary before she burst into flames. Same pale blue fire as Marco. Same perfect stillness, like burning was the most natural thing in the world. Same horrible sizzling sound and sweet, burning smell. But this time I was close enough to see her face, and God help me, she looked happy. Looked like she was finally home. I was holding her when she turned to ash. Tried to pull her away from the flames, and my hands went right through her burning body like she was made of light and heat and nothing solid at all. And when it was over, when there was nothing left but ashes and her grandmother's confirmation cross, I scooped up what I could and brought it home. Which is why I'm sitting here at 4 a.m. writing this down while Sophia Orsini cools in a coffee mug on my kitchen table. Because I can't call the fire department again. Can't listen to another lecture about electrical fires and insurance claims. Can't watch Cardinal Roncalli's face when he tells me this is just another tragic accident that we're not allowed to discuss with anyone. 2 kids dead in 4 months. 2 kids who burned from the inside out during prayer, while I watched helplessly, reduced to ash and metal while following rules that someone knows are necessary but refuses to explain. And here's what really keeps me awake. I'm not the first youth pastor to sit at his kitchen table at 4 a.m., looking at the remains of a child and wondering how many more he'll have to watch burn before someone gives him answers. Tomorrow I have to face Elena and Dante and the other kids who watched Sophia die. Have to somehow convince them that God loves them while praying that none of them ever loves him back quite as much as Marco and Sophia did. Because I'm starting to understand something that makes my hands shake every time I hold the Eucharist. Those rules aren't emergency protocols written by some concerned predecessor. They're a maintenance manual. Instructions for managing a recurring problem that the church has decided to tolerate rather than solve. Someone, somewhere up the chain of command, knows exactly why teenagers spontaneously combust during prayer at Sacred Heart. They know, and they've decided the acceptable solution is to give each new youth pastor a list of rules and hope he's better at following them than the guy before him. Someone knows what's happening here. Someone's been collecting the rules, updating them, passing them down from one youth pastor to the next like some kind of horrible inheritance. And tomorrow I'm going to find out who. Even if it kills me, even if it burns me alive. I called in sick the next morning. First time in 3 years, and Sister Francesca sounded genuinely worried when I told her I had food poisoning. "Father," Should I cancel youth group tonight? The kids are pretty shaken up after that electrical fire. Electrical fire, right? Sophia Orsini turned to Ash in my arms. But sure, let's blame the wiring again. No, don't cancel, I heard myself saying. Just maybe keep it light today. Board games or something. Nothing in the sanctuary. The thing is, I wasn't really sick. Well, not physically. But sitting there with Sophia's ashes still on my kitchen counter, I realized I couldn't face those kids without answers. Couldn't look Elena in the eye and pretend this was normal. Couldn't watch Dante flinch every time someone lit a candle and keep playing dumb about what was happening at Sacred Heart. So instead of leading youth group, I drove to the diocesan archives. The building's this ugly concrete block from the 70s, tucked behind the cathedral like the church is embarrassed by it. Which, knowing what I know now, maybe they should be. Father Bruno Castellano, my predecessor, the guy who wouldn't return my calls, had been working there for 3 years. Cataloging, digitizing, doing whatever it is archivists do with centuries of Catholic paperwork. I found him in the basement, surrounded by file boxes and looking like he hadn't slept since his transfer. Guy had aged 10 years in the 3 since I'd seen him. His hair had gone completely gray, and he'd developed this nervous habit of touching his throat, like he was checking to make sure it wasn't burning. "Matteo," he said when he saw me, and his voice sounded like sandpaper. "I was wondering when you'd show up. 2 kids, Bruno. 2 kids dead. And you left me a list of rules with no explanation." He didn't even try to deny it. Just gestured to a chair across from his desk and started pulling files from a locked cabinet I hadn't noticed before. "How many have you lost?" "Lost? Jesus, Bruno, they're not lost. They're dead. Marco Borghese 4 months ago, Sophia Orsini last night. Both during prayer, both burned from the inside out. Only 2. He actually looked relieved. "I lost 7 in my last year alone. Thought maybe it was accelerating." I stared at him. 7. 7 teenagers died on your watch and you just transferred to archives. I didn't have a choice. He opened the first file and I saw photographs. Crime scene photos, except they weren't crimes. Just ash piles in the shape of kneeling teenagers, scattered across different areas of Sacred Heart. The sanctuary, the youth room, even one in the confessional. "Look at the dates, Matteo." I looked. The photos went back decades. Different photography equipment, different priests in the background, but always the same thing. Teenage ash and that distinctive pile pattern that meant they'd been praying when it happened. "This isn't new," Bruno said, lighting a cigarette with shaking hands. "Sacred Heart has been burning kids since 1963. Maybe longer. These are just the documented cases." Documented by who? The church. Vatican office I'd never heard of until I started digging. Something called the Congregation for Extraordinary Pastoral Phenomena. They've got files on Sacred Heart going back to the Kennedy administration. Patterns, statistics, recommended protocols. He pulled out a thick folder. "Your rules?" I wrote version 12. The guy before me wrote version 11. And so on. I flipped through the files, and my stomach dropped. Dozens of teenagers over 6 decades. Names, ages, circumstances of death. All listed under spontaneous sacred combustion events, like it was a fucking weather phenomenon. Why? My voice came out as a whisper. Why is this happening? Bruno took a long drag from his cigarette. You really want to know? Or do you want to go back to Sacred Heart and follow the rules and hope you only lose 2 or 3 kids per year instead of 7? I want to know. He opened another file. This one was older, typewritten pages yellow with age. 1963. Father Michael Torres, first documented youth pastor at Sacred Heart. Lost 12 kids in 18 months before he figured out some of the basic patterns. Wrote the first set of rules in his own blood after the 12th kid died in his arms. I read Father Torres's handwritten notes in the margins. They burn brightest when they pray hardest. The church says this is God's will. I think God has nothing to do with it. Torres thought it was the building, Bruno continued. Some kind of consecration gone wrong or maybe built on cursed ground. He was half right. Half right. It is the building, but not cursed. Enhanced. He pulled out blueprints, architectural drawings of Sacred Heart from 1923. Look at the sanctuary design. See those geometric patterns in the floor tiles? The specific arrangement of the pews? The height and positioning of the tabernacle. I looked. It seemed like normal church architecture to me, but Bruno was tracing lines with his finger, connecting points across the sanctuary floor. It's a focusing array, he said, built to amplify and concentrate spiritual energy. The whole church is designed like a giant prayer amplifier, and the sanctuary is the focal point. That's insane. Who would build something like that? The same people who've been covering it up for 60 years. He showed me another document, this one with official Vatican letterhead. Congregation for Extraordinary Pastoral Phenomena, established 1962, right around the time Vatican II was changing everything else about the church. Their job is to monitor and manage unusual manifestations of religious devotion in parishes worldwide. I read the document. It was clinical, detached, talking about acceptable casualty rates and spiritual intensity thresholds, like they were discussing crop yields instead of dead children. They know, I said. The Vatican knows this is happening. Not just knows, designed it. Bruno stubbed out his cigarette and immediately lit another. Sacred Heart isn't unique, Matteo. There are churches like it all over the world. Different designs, different focusing mechanisms, but same result. Take kids with strong faith, put them in a spiritually amplified environment, and some of them burn up from the inside. But why? Why would the church want to kill its own members? Who says they're dying? I stared at him. Bruno, I've held their ashes. They're fucking dead. Are they? He pulled out one final file, this one marked with red ink. Classified congregation access only. Read this, then tell me those kids are dead. The file was a theological analysis, written in the kind of dense academic language they use to make horrible ideas sound scholarly. But the basic argument was simple. The teenagers weren't dying. They were being translated, transformed, converted into pure spiritual energy and absorbed into the church's mystical infrastructure. According to the document, every spontaneous sacred combustion event added to the church's overall spiritual power. The burned teenagers became part of the building itself, their faith and devotion literally built into the foundations. Sacred Heart wasn't just a church. It was a battery, powered by the souls of dead children. This is evil, I said. This is actual, literal evil. Is it? Bruno's voice was completely flat. The kids who burn, they're the most faithful ones, right? The ones who really, truly believe. They get to be part of something eternal, something bigger than themselves. They become the foundation of God's house on earth. Bruno, listen to yourself. You're talking about murdering children. I'm talking about transformation. About kids who loved God so much that they became part of his church in the most literal way possible. He stood up, started pacing. Do you know what the alternative is, Matteo? Do you know what happens if we shut down Sacred Heart? Or if we stop doing youth ministry there? The kids live. That's what happens. The kids grow up. They lose their faith like most people do. They get married, have families, worry about mortgages and taxes, and whether their insurance covers their cholesterol medication. They die of cancer or heart disease or car accidents, and then what? Maybe they go to heaven, maybe they don't. But probably they just end. He turned to face me, and his eyes looked completely hollow. But the kids who burn at Sacred Heart? They skip all that. They go straight from perfect faith to eternal purpose. No doubt, no loss of belief, no slow spiritual death. Just transformation into something pure and lasting. You're insane. Am I? Or am I the only one honest enough to admit that this might actually be God's will? He sat back down, started shuffling through the files. You think I wanted to believe this? You think I wanted to watch kids burn while I stood there following rules designed to manage the casualty rate instead of preventing it? Then why didn't you stop it? Why didn't you refuse to follow the rules? Or go public? Or because I tried that? His voice got very quiet. My 6th year as youth pastor. I'd lost 4 kids already, and I couldn't take it anymore. So I broke Rule 5. I told the parents everything, called a meeting, showed them the files, explained what was really happening at Sacred Heart. What happened? The parents didn't believe me, thought I was having a breakdown. Cardinal Roncalli had me committed for psychiatric evaluation. Spent 2 weeks in a facility while the congregation sent someone to manage the situation. He showed me newspaper clippings from that time. Family gas leak kills 3 in tragic accident. Electrical fire claims young lives. Carbon monoxide poisoning in local home. The parents who attended my meeting? Bruno's hands were shaking again. Dead within a month. All of them. Accidents, of course. Tragic coincidences. The kids who'd been at that meeting but whose parents couldn't attend? They burned the day I got out of the hospital. All 6 of them. Same night. During what the newspapers called a catastrophic electrical failure. I felt sick. So you just gave up? I accepted reality. The congregation has been doing this for 60 years. Matteo. They've got systems in place, protocols, resources. You think they're going to let one parish priest shut down their operation because he's squeamish about necessary sacrifices? Necessary for what? For the church's survival. He pulled out a graph showing declining Catholic membership over the decades. Faith is dying, Matteo. Has been since Vatican II tried to modernize everything. People don't believe anymore, not really. They go through the motions, but the deep, burning faith that built cathedrals and launched crusades? That's almost extinct. So the church needs that faith to survive. Not just organizationally, spiritually. The mystical body of Christ requires actual belief to function. And if people won't believe naturally anymore, then the church has to find other ways to concentrate and preserve the faith that still exists. He pointed to Sacred Heart on a map of the diocese. Churches like Sacred Heart are spiritual power plants. They take the few kids who still have real faith and convert that faith into something permanent. The teenagers who burn become part of the church's spiritual infrastructure forever. Their belief powers everything else. That's monstrous, is it? Or is it practical theology? Bruno looked at me with those hollow eyes. How many people has your ministry actually saved, Matteo? How many kids have you brought to real, lasting faith in Christ? Be honest. I thought about it. 3 years of youth ministry, dozens of teenagers through the program. How many were still practicing Catholics? How many would still be in 5 years, 10 years? Maybe a handful, I admitted, right? Out of all those kids, maybe 5 or 6 will keep their faith into adulthood. The rest will drift away, become Christmas and Easter Catholics, eventually stop coming to church entirely. But the 2 who burned, their faith is part of Sacred Heart forever. They're still serving God, still powering the church's mission, still part of the mystical body of Christ. By dying horribly, by transforming gloriously. Do you think Marco Borghese would rather be in college right now, drinking beer and hooking up with girls and slowly losing his faith? Or would he rather be part of something eternal? I wanted to hit him, wanted to grab him by the throat and shake him until he remembered that Marco was a 16-year-old kid with a whole life ahead of him, not a theological abstraction. But before I could do anything, Bruno's phone rang. Castellano, he answered. Then his face went white. When? How many? A long pause. Yes, Your Eminence. I'll tell him. He hung up and looked at me with something that might have been pity. That was Cardinal Roncalli. There's been an incident at Sacred Heart. During afternoon youth group, my blood turned to ice. What kind of incident? Sister Francesca tried to help. Elena Corsini started running a fever during board games, hit 102 degrees, and Sister Francesca remembered your Rule 3. She evacuated everyone immediately, got Elena out of the building. Good. That's what she was supposed to do. Elena's temperature kept climbing. 103, 104, 105. Sister Francesca called an ambulance, but Elena started glowing before the paramedics arrived. She burned in the parking lot, Matteo, in front of Sacred Heart. with Sister Francesca holding her hand. Couldn't breathe. Elena, smart, tough Elena who'd survived Marco's death and helped me watch for the signs in other kids. Gone. But that's not the worst part, Bruno continued. When Elena burned, something happened to the other kids who were evacuated with her. They all started showing symptoms. Fever, that glowing effect, the smell of sulfur. Sister Francesca called Cardinal Roncalli in a panic. How many? All of them. 12 kids, all running fevers, all starting to glow. The Cardinal had them transported to a secure medical facility, but Matteo, Bruno's voice cracked. They're not stopping it. They're studying it, trying to figure out if the burning effect is contagious, or if evacuating Elena somehow triggered a chain reaction. I stood up so fast the chair fell over. I have to get back. I have to help them. You can't. Bruno grabbed my arm. The facility is classified. You don't have clearance. And even if you did, what would you do? The process has already started. Those kids are going to burn whether you're there or not. I have to try. Matteo, listen to me. If you go back now, if you try to interfere with this, the congregation will consider you a security risk. You'll end up like those parents who attended my meeting. Car accident, gas leak, heart attack in your sleep. I pulled away from him. So what, I just let 12 kids die? You accept that they're being transformed into something greater than death. His voice was completely flat again. And you learn from this. Elena burned outside the church, but she still burned. Which means the effect isn't limited to Sacred Heart's interior. The spiritual amplification field extends beyond the building itself. You're talking about updating the rules. I'm talking about reality, Matteo. Those 12 kids are going to burn. That's already decided. The question is, do their deaths teach us something that might save others? Or do we just waste the information? I looked at the files scattered across his desk. 60 years of dead teenagers turned into data points and protocol updates. 60 years of youth pastors who'd learned to see children as acceptable casualties in some cosmic spiritual war. There has to be another way, I said. There is. Bruno opened a drawer and pulled out a transfer request form, already filled out with my name. You can take my advice. Request transfer to diocesan archives. Spend your time cataloging old documents instead of watching kids burn. Let someone else be youth pastor at Sacred Heart. And just abandon them? Accept reality. The church needs what Sacred Heart provides. The congregation will keep operating it regardless of who's in charge. At least if you transfer out, you won't have to watch. I stared at the form. My name in neat typewriter letters. Requesting reassignment due to pastoral stress and need for spiritual renewal. An easy out. A chance to stop being complicit in whatever was happening at Sacred Heart. But then I thought about the kids still alive. Dante Calana with his ADHD and his jokes about altar candles. The freshman class coming up from middle school. The new families joining the parish every month. Bringing their teenagers to youth group without knowing they were walking into a spiritual slaughterhouse. No, I said, and tore up the transfer request. I'm going back. Matteo, I'm going back. And I'm going to figure out how to stop this. There has to be a way to shut down Sacred Heart's amplification field, or disrupt the congregation's operation or something. Bruno looked at me with something between admiration and pity. You think you're the first youth pastor to feel that way? You think I didn't try everything? Exorcism, deconsecration, even burning down parts of the building. Nothing works. The amplification field is built into the church's fundamental structure. You'd have to demolish the entire building and salt the earth underneath. Then that's what I'll do. With what authority? What resources? The congregation has Vatican backing, unlimited funding, and 60 years of experience. You're one parish priest with seminary debt and a grandmother who'd disown you if you left the priesthood. He was right, and I hated him for it. But I also hated myself more for even considering his transfer request. Maybe I can't stop them, I said, but I can make it harder. I can document everything, gather evidence, find other people who've figured out what's happening. Other people like who? Other youth pastors. Other parishes with amplification churches. There have to be others, right? You said Sacred Heart isn't unique. Bruno laughed, but there was no humor in it. Oh, there are others. Want to meet one? He pulled out his phone and made a call. Father Martinez? It's Bruno Castellano. I've got someone here who wants to learn about your parish. Yes, he's new to the program. Sacred Heart. 2 casualties so far. Okay. I'll send him over. He hung up and wrote an address on a piece of paper. Father Miguel Martinez, St. Anthony's in Newark. Amplification Church, operating since 1971. He's lost 43 kids over 12 years. 43. St. Anthony's has a higher spiritual intensity rating than Sacred Heart. Their teenagers burn faster and more frequently. But Father Martinez has also developed some interesting modifications to the standard protocols. What kind of modifications? Go ask him yourself. But Mateo, when you meet him, pay attention to his hands. And don't be surprised if he seems different from other priests you've known. I took the address and headed for the door. But as I reached it, Bruno called after me. Mateo, those 12 kids from this afternoon, they burned an hour ago. All at once in the same facility. The congregation got their data, and Cardinal Roncalli is calling it a tragic gas leak at a youth retreat center. I stopped, my hand on the doorknob. Elena, gone. But according to the preliminary reports, her spiritual energy output during the burning process was 3 times higher than normal. They're calling it a breakthrough in amplification efficiency. I left without saying goodbye. Couldn't trust myself to speak without either screaming or throwing up. 12 kids. 12 more teenagers added to the congregation's files. Their faith converted into spiritual energy to power God's work on earth. And I was driving through New Jersey traffic to meet another priest who'd learned to see burning children as an acceptable cost of doing business. But as I drove, I kept thinking about Elena's last words to me. Not during her final phone call, but 3 weeks ago, when her fever had broken and the burning process had stopped. She'd hugged me in the parish parking lot and said, "Thanks for saving me, Father Carbone. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't gotten me out of there in time." I'd saved her once. For 3 weeks, Elena Corsini had been alive because I'd followed the rules and evacuated her when her temperature spiked. The rules worked. Sometimes, when followed correctly, they could interrupt the burning process and save kids who were already starting to transform, which meant the congregation wasn't just managing the casualty rate. They were actively choosing which kids to save and which kids to let burn. And that gave me an idea. Father Miguel Martinez lived in a studio apartment above a Chinese restaurant in Newark, and when he answered the door, I understood what Bruno meant about his hands. They were covered in burn scars, not random accident scars, but deliberate patterns that looked almost like prayer beads wrapped around his fingers and palms. "You're the Sacred Heart pastor," he said, not a question. His voice had the same sandpaper quality as Bruno's, like he'd been breathing smoke for years. "How many have you lost?" 15 as of this afternoon. The number felt wrong coming out of my mouth. That morning it had been 2. Now Elena and 12 others were gone, and I was standing in a stranger's hallway trying to figure out how to process mass casualty events like they were parish statistics. 15 in 3 years? You're either very good at following rules or very lucky. He stepped aside to let me in. The apartment was sparse. Just a bed, a desk, and filing cabinets covering every wall. Like Bruno's archive, but more organized, more purposeful. Bruno said, "You've developed modifications to the protocols." "I've developed survival strategies." Martinez gestured to a chair across from his desk. "The congregation's rules are designed to manage casualty rates, not prevent them. But if you're creative about interpretation, you can sometimes interrupt the process entirely." He opened one of the filing cabinets and pulled out a thick folder labeled "Active Cases." Inside were photographs of teenagers' school pictures, mostly with medical charts attached. Ages, temperatures, symptoms, intervention attempts. "These are kids who started the burning process but didn't complete it," Martinez explained. Interrupted combustions. The congregation calls them partial manifestations and considers them failures, but I call them successes. I flipped through the files. Dozens of teenagers with fever charts that spiked to 105, 106, even 108 degrees before dropping back to normal. All of them alive according to the notes. How? Rule modification. The official protocols are designed to document and contain, not prevent. But every rule has loopholes if you're willing to exploit them. He showed me a modified version of the Sacred Heart rules, with handwritten annotations in the margins. Rule 1. Never leave teenagers alone in the sanctuary after 9 p.m. Martinez's annotation. Unless they're showing early symptoms, elevated temperature, sulfur smell, unusual spiritual intensity. In those cases, physical contact with the priest can interrupt the spiritual amplification process. Rule 3. If a teenager's body temperature exceeds 102 degrees Fahrenheit, evacuate immediately. His modification. But maintain physical contact during evacuation. Skin-to-skin contact appears to ground the spiritual energy and prevent complete combustion. Rule 5. Never discuss the incidents with parents without cardinal approval. Martinez's version, but medical information can be shared with parents if framed as health concerns rather than spiritual phenomena. This allows for earlier intervention and family-based support structures. You've saved them by touching them, more than touching, absorbing. He held up his scarred hands. Every interrupted combustion leaves marks. The kids don't burn, but the spiritual energy has to go somewhere. So it goes into whoever's providing the grounding contact. I stared at his scars, understanding now why they looked like prayer beads. Each mark represented a saved teenager, a successful interruption of the congregation's harvest. How many? 47 over 12 years. 47 kids who were supposed to burn, who didn't because I was willing to take their place. He rolled up his sleeves, showing more scars along his forearms. The congregation doesn't like it. They've tried to transfer me 6 times. But St. Anthony's casualty rate is still within acceptable parameters, so they can't make a case for removal. Because you're only saving some of them. Because I'm only saving the ones I can. His voice got very quiet. The spiritual energy output is massive, Matteo. Each interrupted combustion feels like being struck by lightning. I can maybe handle one every few months without permanent damage. More than that, and I start showing symptoms myself. What kind of symptoms? Instead of answering, he unbuttoned his shirt. His chest and back were covered in more scars, but these were different, deeper, more extensive. Some of them still looked red and fresh. This is what happens when you absorb too much spiritual energy too quickly, he said. Internal burning, the same process that kills the kids, but slower. The doctors think it's some kind of autoimmune condition. They've got me on immunosuppressants and pain medication, but it's getting worse. I felt sick. You're dying. I'm transforming. Same as the kids, just at a different rate. The question is whether I can save enough of them before the process completes. He rebut-toned his shirt. 47 so far. I'm hoping for 50 before I burn out completely. This is insane. You're martyring yourself to save teenagers the church wants to murder. I'm serving God's will instead of the congregation's agenda. Martinez sat down heavily, and I could see him wince as the scarred skin pulled tight. Those kids have real faith, Matteo. Pure, burning faith that most adults can't even comprehend. The congregation wants to harvest that faith for institutional power. I want to preserve it in living believers, but you're dying for it. I'm dying anyway. We all are. The question is whether my death serves God or serves the Vatican bureaucracy that thinks it speaks for God. He pulled out another file, this one labeled Network Contacts. Inside were names and addresses of priests from around the world: France, Brazil, Philippines, Ireland. All with notes about their parishes, their casualty rates, their survival strategies. You're not alone in this, Martinez said. There are dozens of us. Priests who figured out what the congregation is really doing and decided to fight back. We share information, techniques, support. We call ourselves the pastoral resistance. Resistance to what? To the industrialization of faith, to treating believers like raw materials in some cosmic manufacturing process. He showed me photographs from other parishes, children who'd been saved, priests with similar scars, churches where the casualty rates were dropping despite congregation pressure. This is bigger than just Sacred Heart, I realized. Much bigger. The congregation operates amplification churches on every continent. Thousands of them. They've been harvesting children's faith for 60 years, using it to power everything from Vatican politics to missionary work to the Pope's own spiritual authority. The Pope knows. The Pope is powered by it. Every papal blessing, every major encyclical, every moment of spiritual authority. It's all backed by the concentrated faith of dead children. Martinez's voice was bitter. You think Pope Francis's charisma is natural? You think his ability to inspire millions is just personal magnetism? He's running on the spiritual energy of every kid who's burned in a congregation facility since his election. I thought about meeting the Pope 2 years ago during a diocesan event. The way he'd seemed to glow with inner light, the way his presence had made everyone in the room feel closer to God. I thought it was holiness. Now I wondered if it was something else entirely. How do we stop it? We don't. Not directly. The congregation has too much power, too many resources, too much institutional backing. Martinez closed the network file. But we can save individual kids. We can disrupt the harvest one child at a time. And maybe, if enough of us do it for long enough, we can preserve enough authentic faith to rebuild the church from the ground up. Rebuild it how? Without the amplification infrastructure, without the spiritual harvesting, without treating believers like resources to be consumed. He looked at me with those hollow eyes that all the resistance priests seem to have. It'll take generations, maybe centuries, but the alternative is letting the congregation burn every faithful child in the world to power their institutional ambitions. Before I could respond, his phone rang. The ringtone was a Gregorian chant, which would have been funny under different circumstances. Martinez, he answered. Then his face went white. When? How many? Pause. No, don't send them there. That facility is compromised. I don't care what the cardinal says. Miguel, listen to me carefully. He hung up and immediately started pulling files from his cabinets. What's happening? St. Catherine's in Boston. Amplification Church, run by Father Miguel Herrera. Different Miguel, he's new to the network. Congregation just triggered a mass combustion event. 23 kids, all burning simultaneously. Jesus Christ. But here's the thing, Herrera interrupted 7 of them. 7 successful groundings in one night. The congregation is furious, calling it catastrophic spiritual wastage. They're sending a containment team. Containment of what? Of Herrera, and any evidence of resistance activity. Martinez was shoving documents into a briefcase. When the congregation decides a priest is actively sabotaging their operations, they don't just transfer him. They make him disappear. Disappear how? Car accident, heart attack, suicide due to pastoral stress. The same way they handle problematic parents or nosy journalists. He grabbed his coat. I'm driving to Boston. Herrera needs backup, and those 7 kids need to be moved somewhere safe. Safe from what? From recapture. Interrupted combustions are unstable. Mateo, the kids don't burn completely, but they're still carrying massive amounts of spiritual energy. If the congregation gets hold of them, they can force complete the process. I felt like I was drowning in information. Force complete how? Medical procedures. They have facilities, machines that can extract and concentrate spiritual energy from living subjects. It's more painful than natural combustion, but it achieves the same result. Martinez headed for the door. You coming to Boston to your first resistance operation? Time to decide, Mateo. Are you a youth pastor who follows rules designed to kill children? Or are you someone who's willing to fight for them? I thought about Elena, about the way she'd hugged me in the parking lot after I'd saved her the first time, about the 12 kids who'd burned that afternoon while I was reading congregation files, about the freshman class at Sacred Heart who didn't know they were entering a spiritual slaughterhouse. I'm coming. The drive to Boston took 4 hours, and Martinez spent most of it briefing me on resistance protocols. How to identify kids in the early stages of combustion. How to ground their spiritual energy without absorbing too much yourself. How to document everything in ways the congregation couldn't suppress or destroy. The most important thing, he said as we crossed into Massachusetts, is understanding that this isn't about saving individual children. It's about preserving authentic faith in a church that's forgotten what faith actually means. What do you mean? The congregation thinks faith is a resource, something to be harvested, concentrated, and deployed for institutional purposes. But real faith isn't about serving the church. It's about serving God. And God doesn't need the church to burn children to prove their devotion. Then why is this happening? Why would God allow it? Maybe he's not. Maybe this is what happens when human institutions get so corrupt that they mistake their own power for divine will. Martinez lit a cigarette, his scarred hands shaking slightly. Or maybe this is a test. Maybe God is waiting to see if anyone in the church still remembers that we're supposed to protect the innocent, not sacrifice them. We arrived at St. Catherine's just after midnight. The church was surrounded by unmarked vans and men in suits who definitely weren't FBI. Congregation containment team, just like Martinez had predicted. Too late, Martinez muttered. They got here first. But as we watched from across the street, 7 teenagers emerged from the church's side door, escorted by a priest I assumed was Father Herrera. The kids looked dazed but alive, and I could see bandages on their hands and arms, the telltale signs of interrupted combustion. He got them out, I said. Now we have to keep them out. Martinez pulled out his phone and sent a text message. Within minutes, 3 different cars appeared at various points around the church. Resistance network, I realized. Other priests who'd dropped everything to help with an extraction. What followed was the most surreal hour of my life. While the congregation team was focused on searching the church for evidence, the resistance priests systematically evacuated the 7 surviving teenagers. Not dramatically, just quiet conversations in parking lots, kids getting into cars with adults they trusted, normal-looking interactions that happened to relocate potential victims away from institutional kidnappers. Father Herrera was the last to leave. I watched him hand over a briefcase to one of the other priests. Documentation, probably. Evidence of what had really happened at St. Catherine's that night. Then the congregation team emerged from the church, and I saw something that made my blood run cold. They were carrying ash urns. 16 of them. The remains of the teenagers who hadn't been saved, already processed and prepared for whatever ritual use the congregation had planned. They work fast, Martinez observed. Probably had the urns pre-labeled. That's monstrous. That's efficient. The congregation has been doing this for 60 years, Mateo. They've got the process down to a science. He started the car. But tonight, they only harvested 16 kids instead of 23. That's 7 victories. As we drove away from St. Catherine's, Martinez explained what would happen next. The 7 surviving teenagers would be relocated to safe houses, parishes where the priests were part of the resistance network, churches without amplification infrastructure. Their families would be told they were attending special retreat programs or accelerated religious education courses. For how long? Until they're 18 and can make their own decisions about faith. Or until the spiritual energy they're carrying dissipates naturally. Usually takes 2 to 3 years. And their parents just accept that? Most parents trust the church, Mateo. If a priest says their teenager needs special spiritual guidance, they don't ask too many questions. Especially when the alternative is admitting that their child almost burned to death in God's house. We were halfway back to New Jersey when Martinez's phone rang again. This conversation was shorter, but I could see his face getting darker as it progressed. What now? Sacred Heart. Cardinal Roncalli is implementing emergency protocols. Apparently, your 12 casualties this afternoon triggered some kind of review process. Martinez was driving faster now, weaving through late-night traffic. They're sending a congregation assessment team to evaluate the spiritual efficiency of your parish's amplification systems. What does that mean? It means they're going to test the church's ability to burn kids, probably using volunteers from your youth group. His scarred hands gripped the steering wheel. How many teenagers are active in your program right now? I did quick math in my head. Maybe 25, 30. But classes don't start again until classes don't matter. If the congregation wants test subjects, they'll call a special event. Emergency youth retreat, crisis counseling session, memorial service for the kids who died this afternoon. Something that gets all your remaining teenagers into the church at the same time. They can't just kill all of them. They can if they classify it as a catastrophic spiritual manifestation. Make it look like some kind of religious hysteria or mass possession event. The media will blame cult behavior or teenage suicide clusters. The families will get consolation payments and confidentiality agreements. I felt like I was going to throw up. How do we stop it? We don't. Not all of them. Martinez's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. But we might be able to save some. If we can get to Sacred Heart before the congregation team runs their tests, we can identify the kids most likely to burn and evacuate them preemptively. Evacuate them how? Their parents will never. Medical emergencies, food poisoning, flu outbreak, family crises that require immediate departure. We'll have to be creative, but it's possible to remove maybe half the kids before the testing begins. And the other half? Martinez didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible over the road noise. The other half burn, and we document everything, so their deaths aren't completely meaningless. I stared out the window at the New Jersey suburbs rushing past. Somewhere in those houses, teenagers were sleeping peacefully, maybe dreaming about college or girlfriends or summer jobs. Kids who had no idea that men in suits were planning to test industrial burning equipment using their spiritual energy as fuel. This is evil, I said. This is actual, literal evil. Yes, it is. The question is, what are you going to do about it? I thought about Elena's hug in the parking lot, about Marco's enthusiasm for altar serving, about the freshman class that would be entering Sacred Heart's youth program in September, walking unknowingly into a spiritual slaughterhouse. I'm going to fight. Good. Because we're about to find out how many kids you can save when the entire system is designed to kill them. We reached Sacred Heart just before dawn. The parking lot was already full of unmarked vans and cars with Vatican license plates. Congregation assessment team, just like Martinez had predicted. But as we sat there watching the church, I realized something that made me feel simultaneously terrified and hopeful. The congregation thought they were dealing with one rogue priest who'd lost too many kids too quickly. They didn't know about the resistance network. They didn't know that Martinez was in contact with dozens of other priests who'd learned to interrupt combustions. They didn't know that their entire operation was being documented, studied, and systematically sabotaged by the very people they trusted to implement it. They don't know about you, I said. They don't know about any of us. That's our advantage. Martinez was already pulling equipment from his briefcase, medical thermometers, documentation cameras, contact information for safe house parishes. But after tonight, they will. Once we start interrupting their test burns, the congregation will know Sacred Heart has been compromised. What happens then? Then we disappear. New identities, new parishes, new resistance cells. The network has protocols for compromised operations. He handed me a modified rule sheet for Sacred Heart, the same 7 rules I'd been following, but with annotations showing how to exploit each one for child protection rather than casualty management. But first, we save as many kids as we can. I took the modified rules and felt something I hadn't experienced since Marco's death. Hope. Not hope that the system would change, or that the congregation would suddenly develop a conscience, but hope that individual children could be protected, even if the institution that claimed to serve God had forgotten what God actually wanted. How many do you think we can save? Martinez looked at the congregation vans surrounding our church, calculating odds and resources and variables I couldn't even imagine. Maybe half, if we're smart and lucky and willing to pay the price for interrupting their operations. What price? He held up his scarred hands, showing me the cost of 47 interrupted combustions over 12 years. Everything, Mateo. Saving kids from the congregation costs everything. I nodded, understanding finally what Bruno had tried to tell me in the archives. The system was designed to burn children. Fighting it meant accepting that you would probably burn too, just more slowly. But as I looked at Sacred Heart's sanctuary windows, where the morning light was starting to shine through stained glass that had been installed to focus spiritual energy into lethal concentrations, I realized I'd already made my choice. Elena had hugged me in that parking lot and thanked me for saving her life. Even though the congregation had killed her 3 weeks later, those 3 weeks had mattered. They'd been real and valuable, and worth the cost of one priest's willingness to break rules designed to murder children. "Let's go save some kids," I said. Martinez smiled for the first time since I'd met him. It was a horrible smile, full of scars and pain and the knowledge that we were about to fight a battle we couldn't win. But it was also the most genuinely holy expression I'd seen on anyone's face in 3 years of ministry. "Welcome to the Resistance, Father Carbone." The assessment team finished their work at Sacred Heart 3 days later. Official casualty count: 8 teenagers during emergency spiritual counseling sessions. Unofficial count: 17 kids who should have burned but didn't, because Martinez taught me how to ground their spiritual energy into my own body during the congregation's testing procedures. I'm writing this 6 months later from St. Alphonsus Parish in rural Montana, where Cardinal Roncalli transferred me after what he called my outstanding crisis management during the Sacred Heart spiritual emergency. The burn scars on my hands and forearms look exactly like Martinez's prayer bead patterns now. 17 interrupted combustions in 3 days. The doctors think it's some kind of stress-related dermatitis. St. Alphonsus isn't an amplification church. There's no special wiring in the sanctuary, no focused spiritual energy collection systems, no hidden rooms where they store the ash urns. Just a normal parish with normal teenagers who attend youth group without spontaneously bursting into flames. But last week, Cardinal Roncalli called to congratulate me on my new assignment. "Diocesan Youth Spiritual Development Coordinator," he said. "Very prestigious position for someone your age." Then he sent me a briefcase with 17 files inside. Teenagers from across the Montana diocese, all showing early spiritual intensity markers, all recommended for special guidance under my supervision, all perfect candidates for amplification. The briefcase also contained construction blueprints for St. Alphonsus. Proposed renovations to enhance the spiritual atmosphere of youth ministry spaces. New electrical systems, focused lighting, sanctuary modifications that I recognized from my time studying Sacred Heart's infrastructure. They're turning St. Alphonsus into an amplification church, and they want me to run it. I called Martinez that night, but his number was disconnected. I tried Father Bruno at the archives, but got a recording saying he'd been transferred to administrative duties in Vatican City. I reached out to 3 other resistance contacts from the network, but all their phones went straight to voicemail. The pastoral resistance, it seems, has been systematically dismantled. But here's what the congregation doesn't understand. They didn't just promote me to run their newest spiritual harvesting operation. They promoted someone who knows exactly how their system works, who has contacts with parents and community leaders, who understands the technical requirements for interrupting combustion events. They gave me access to 17 potential victims and asked me to build the infrastructure to kill them. Instead, I'm building something else. The renovations at St. Alphonsus are proceeding exactly according to Cardinal Roncalli's specifications. New electrical systems, enhanced lighting, modified sanctuary space. But I've made some adjustments to the blueprints. Small changes that the Vatican contractors won't notice, but that will fundamentally alter how the amplification equipment functions. Where the congregation's design focused spiritual energy into lethal concentrations, My modifications will disperse it harmlessly throughout the church. Where their system was built to harvest children's faith, mine will preserve and protect it. The 17 teenagers in my files don't know they were selected for spiritual termination. Their parents think they're participating in an advanced religious education program. The community believes St. Alphonsus is receiving a generous renovation grant from the Vatican. But when the congregation activates their new amplification system for the first time, instead of burning children, it's going to create what I can only describe as a permanent sanctuary. A church where authentic faith is amplified and preserved rather than harvested and consumed. I learned this technique from Martinez during our 3 days at Sacred Heart. Not just how to interrupt combustions, but how to redirect spiritual energy into architectural structures. How to turn a church into a protection system instead of a killing machine. The 17 kids will survive. Their faith will be enhanced rather than destroyed. And the congregation will lose their newest harvesting facility to what they'll probably classify as a technical malfunction. But more importantly, I'll have created something that can be replicated. A model for other resistance priests who want to protect children instead of sacrificing them. Documentation of how to sabotage amplification systems from the inside, using the Vatican's own construction resources and administrative authority. I'm not just saving 17 teenagers in rural Montana. I'm building a prototype for institutional resistance. The scarring on my hands gets worse every day. Each time I ground spiritual energy to protect a child, the burning spreads a little further up my arms. Martinez was right about the cost of fighting the congregation. It consumes you, piece by piece, until there's nothing left but scars and the memory of children who didn't burn because you were willing to burn for them. But I've calculated the timeline. Based on the rate of tissue damage and the spiritual energy output I'll need to absorb during the St. Alphonsus operation, I have maybe 18 months before the burning process completes itself. 18 months to document everything I've learned, to create training materials for other priests who want to join the resistance, to establish safe house networks and communication protocols and technical specifications for sabotaging amplification infrastructure. 18 months to build a resistance movement that can survive after I'm gone. The teenagers at St. Alphonsus don't know that their youth pastor is slowly burning to death to protect them. They think I'm just enthusiastic about ministry, maybe a little too invested in their spiritual development. They joke that I take too many pictures during youth group activities, that I ask too many questions about their families and personal lives. They don't realize I'm documenting everything in case something happens to me, creating evidence trails that other resistance priests can follow, building institutional memory that can't be erased when the congregation decides I've become too problematic to tolerate. Last month, I received a visit from Father Paolo Grimaldi, the deacon who used to work at Sacred Heart. He's been promoted to Diocesan Youth Safety Coordinator. His job is to travel between parishes and evaluate compliance with congregation protocols. "Impressive setup you have here," he said, examining the construction work at St. Alphonsus. "Very thorough implementation of the Vatican specifications. I wanted to make sure everything was done correctly, of course, though I noticed some unusual modifications in the electrical configuration. Creative interpretations of the standard design. I showed him my annotated blueprints, explaining each change as an enhancement to spiritual energy collection rather than sabotage of the amplification system. Paolo listened carefully, taking notes, asking technical questions that demonstrated he understood exactly what I was really building. "Fascinating approach," he said finally. "I'll be interested to see the results when the system goes online." But as he was leaving, Paolo handed me a business card with nothing but a phone number written on it. "In case you need to discuss any technical issues with someone who understands the complexities of youth ministry infrastructure." I called the number that night. Paolo answered on the first ring. "Martinez taught me the same techniques," he said without preamble, before the congregation transferred him to administrative duties in Rome. "I've been working with parishes across the diocese, making similar modifications to their amplification systems." "How many?" 12 churches so far. None of them functional as harvesting facilities anymore, but all of them officially compliant with Vatican specifications. Paolo's voice carried the same sandpaper quality I remembered from Martinez and Bruno, the sound of someone who'd been breathing spiritual smoke for too long. Are there others? More than you'd think. The congregation's promotion strategy is flawed. They keep putting resistance priests in positions of authority, thinking that institutional pressure will force us to comply. Instead, they're giving us the resources and access we need to sabotage their operations from within. A resistance network inside the Vatican bureaucracy. Exactly. Martinez called it institutional jujitsu, using the congregation's own power structures against them. Paolo explained that there were now resistance priests in diocesan positions across North America, all working to subvert amplification infrastructure while maintaining the appearance of compliance. But we need coordination, documentation, training materials for new resistance members, someone with the technical knowledge and institutional access to create a systematic opposition movement. Someone like a diocesan youth spiritual development coordinator, someone exactly like that. So now I have a new mission, beyond just protecting the 17 teenagers at St. Alphonsus. I'm building the infrastructure for a continent-wide resistance movement, creating protocols for identifying and recruiting resistance priests, documenting sabotage techniques that can be implemented using Vatican resources and authority, building a church within the church, one that serves God instead of institutional power, that protects children instead of sacrificing them, that preserves authentic faith instead of harvesting it for political purposes. The burning in my hands and arms spreads a little more each day. Sometimes I catch myself staring at the scars, counting the children who didn't die because I was willing to absorb their spiritual energy. 17 from Sacred Heart, 8 more from preliminary testing at St. Alphonsus, 3 from a consultation visit to a parish in Billings where the local priest was having technical difficulties with new amplification equipment, 28 saved children, 28 scars that burn constantly but feel like the most meaningful pain I've ever experienced. Martinez was right about the cost of fighting the congregation, but he was also right about the mathematics of resistance. Every child we save, every amplification system we sabotage, every priest we recruit to the resistance, it all adds up to something larger than individual victories. We're not just saving kids. We're preserving the possibility that the Catholic Church might someday remember what it was supposed to be before it became an institution that burns children to power papal blessings. Last week, I received an official commendation from Vatican City. Outstanding implementation of youth spiritual development protocols. The letter was signed by Cardinal Secretary of State Pietro Parolin himself, praising my innovative approach to enhancing spiritual energy collection in rural parish environments. They think I'm their most successful new administrator, a young priest who's enthusiastically embracing the congregation's mission and achieving impressive results with advanced amplification technology. They have no idea I've created a training manual for institutional sabotage that's being quietly distributed to resistance priests across 3 time zones. But they will. Soon. The St. Alphonsus amplification system goes online next month. When it does, instead of generating the massive spiritual energy output the Vatican is expecting, it will produce what can only be described as a localized miracle. 17 teenagers whose faith becomes more authentic and powerful instead of being harvested for institutional use. A church that amplifies God's presence instead of the congregation's political authority. And when Cardinal Roncalli realizes what I've actually built, when the Vatican's technical experts start investigating the malfunction in Montana, they'll discover that their newest youth spiritual development coordinator has been systematically sabotaging their operations for 8 months. They'll also discover that he's trained dozens of other priests to do exactly the same thing. The congregation will have to choose: acknowledge publicly that they've been burning children for 60 years, or quietly shut down their amplification program and pretend it never existed. Either way, the systematic murder of faithful teenagers ends. And if I'm very lucky, I'll live long enough to see it happen. Though honestly, looking at the burn scars that now extend almost to my shoulders, I don't think luck is going to be the determining factor. But that's okay. Martinez taught me that martyrdom isn't about dying for God. It's about living for God until you can't anymore. And I've had 6 months of protecting children instead of sacrificing them, 6 months of serving authentic faith instead of institutional power, 6 months of being the kind of priest I thought I was becoming when I first felt called to ministry. That's worth burning for. Next month, when the St. Alphonsus system activates and 17 teenagers experience spiritual enhancement instead of spiritual termination, someone else will have to continue the resistance work. Paolo, probably, or one of the other coordinators who've been sabotaging amplification infrastructure across the diocese. But the protocols will exist. The training materials will be documented. The network of resistance priests will have the resources they need to protect children in parishes where the Vatican is still trying to harvest their faith. And maybe, someday, there will be a Catholic Church that serves God instead of institutional power. A church that nurtures children's faith instead of consuming it. A church that remembers why people believed in the first place, before men in Vatican offices decided that belief was a resource to be exploited rather than a gift to be protected. I can feel the burning spreading through my chest now, the same internal combustion process that kills the teenagers, just slower and more controlled. The doctors have stopped trying to treat what they think is an autoimmune condition. The pain medication helps, but not much. But yesterday, Elena Corsini's younger sister started attending youth group at St. Alphonsus. She has the same spiritual intensity that marked Elena for amplification, the same burning faith that the congregation would have harvested and consumed. Instead, she's going to grow up in a church where her faith makes her stronger instead of making her dead. That's worth everything. The system is designed to burn children, but we learned how to burn ourselves instead. And in 18 months, when the internal burning process completes itself and I become another casualty of the institutional war over children's souls, the resistance network will still exist. Other priests will still be sabotaging amplification infrastructure. Other children will still be protected from a church that forgot what protection means. Martinez was right about the mathematics of resistance. Every child we save is worth the price we pay to save them, even if that price is everything. Final note found in Father Carbone's desk after his death from complications related to an autoimmune condition. The St. Alphonsus amplification system was quietly decommissioned following a technical malfunction that resulted in what Vatican investigators classified as anomalous spiritual enhancement rather than standard energy extraction. 17 teenagers reported feeling closer to God following the incident. The Diocesan Youth Spiritual Development Program was discontinued 6 months later due to administrative restructuring.